Hey everybody, I'm Tim. I'm your sociology instructor. Welcome to Introduction to Sociology. This is our first little video sort of lecture thing, and there's going to be little stop-offs along the way where the video pauses. In order to keep going, it's going to want you to answer a question. And I do that just to kind of make it a little bit more interactive, so it's like I'm actually talking to a group of people instead of just talking into a computer screen, which feels weird. I got to be honest with you. I'm just kind of talking into a computer screen, looking at myself, and it feels weird. So let's get rid of me and let's look at this presentation that we got going. So the first question that we have is WTF is sociology? I don't know what WTF stands for. That's just a thing that the kids told me to say. But what is sociology? What are we even talking about? So we're going to break it down into a couple of root words here. You got the ology, which is sort of science, study, right? And then the socio part, right? And that just refers to people, or more specifically, it refers to more than one people. For something to be social, more than one person has to be involved. So we're really dealing with human interaction. So sociology is sort of the study of human interaction. It takes more than one person to make it sociology. So some of our things that we can study are going to be a little bit mundane. I really like this. This is very sociological, right? How to behave on an elevator. When you're standing there on an elevator, you're not with strangers. You're not making eye contact. If you're making any conversation, it should be pretty, benign, pretty plain. Not asking anybody super personal questions when you meet them on an elevator, right? Not getting to know somebody great. You might talk about the weather at most, right? So these are the way there are rules, and there are rules to the way we behave in public and the way we act with other people around, and that changes depending on the situation. But sociologists, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the way people behave when we're in groups. Now, the key concept that we're looking for is patterns, right? Now, this is, I pulled this straight from the textbook, from the reading that we had. This is page 3, and I want to dive into this little section just a little bit more. But we're looking at patterns, right? So they can be as benign as just the way you behave on an elevator, to voting patterns. And all of this stuff matters. So we're looking for patterns. And a lot of times when we're looking at big picture stuff like voting patterns, you're going to see the patterns that appear along demographic lines, right? So this section talked about white men in Wyoming and how white men in Wyoming tend to voted for McCain, or they tend to vote Republican by about a 2-to-1 margin. So when we're talking about demographic lines, we're talking about descriptions of a given population, right? Its age, their gender, their race, the types of jobs they do, anything that you can use to describe an entire population. That's the entire group of people that live in a city, within a state, within one country, within one community. However, the boundaries can shift, but when you're talking about a population of a given place and you're describing it, you're using the idea of demography. So you're describing them in demographic terms. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but generally, if you go to Wikipedia and you look up any city's demographic information, you're going to see a breakdown of the races and ethnicities and ages in that town. So recognizing a pattern, like recognizing this pattern that white men in Colorado vote for the Republican and presidential elections twice as often as they do the Democrat, is where sociology begins, right? That's just one observation, and that's our entry point. So we're going to take that observation and we're going to start peeling back the layers on that. We're going to start asking questions about, well, what is it about Wyoming that makes white men there vote Republican more often than not? We're going to start asking questions. So the tricky part about sociology is that we rarely find concrete answers. That when we get to a good question and we start peeling back the layers on that, it usually just leads us to more questions. But the more layers we peel back, the better the questions get, and the more truth we're revealing through that process. The secondary reading that you've got for this week deals with that, right? When we come out of this sociology class, you may have more questions than answers, but I hope that the questions that you ask after the class are better and a little bit more in tune to what's actually happening with human interaction than you had when we first started. But still, very few concrete answers, but you're going to come out still with a lot of questions. Page 4 in the book, and I'm not going to go through every page, but this is just getting us started. We want to talk about the social environment. Again, when you see the word social, I want you to think about interaction, right? Social environment is an interaction environment. It's people's, cultures, institutions, but it's the things that you interact with when you're out in the world. And here is the textbook definition of sociology. Again, you're going to break it down into two parts, the scientific and the social, right? So the scientific, that is the systematic approach to what we're doing. It's methodical. Again, the root word of methodical, right, is method, right? There's a method to the way we go up and approach and study what we're doing. It's not just kind of observing things all willy-nilly. That's what comedians do, right? Comedians come up and they make funny observations about the world. The difference between a comedian making funny observations about the world we live in and a sociologist is that a sociologist backs up what they observe with methods, with a scientific way of studying what we do. And we'll talk more about those methods in chapter 2. And then social. And again, when you see the word social, think interactional. Think humans interacting with one another. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the scientific study of how humans interact. So again, for it to be sociology, more than one person has to be involved. So this is the social moment when two people start interacting. That's where sociology begins. That's that social moment. Now, just to muddy the water, just like a good sociologist does. I gave you something real concrete, like more than one person has to be involved, but then I'm going to immediately muddy it a little bit and say that those two people don't necessarily have to be present at the same time for a certain action to be interactional in nature, right? When we're getting ready to go in the bathroom, getting ourselves together in the morning, you may be by yourself, you're probably by yourself, but it's still an interactional sort of action because the way you dress and the way you do your hair, and if you're putting on makeup and if you're tucking in your shirt and all the decisions that you're making before you leave the bathroom and before you leave your residence, before you go out into the world, all of those decisions that you're making depend on the situation you're walking into, right? So you're going to dress differently if you're going to school versus if you're going to work versus if you're going just, to the gas station to pick up a cup of coffee. All of the nature of the environment that you're walking into affects those decisions that you're making. And that's what we're talking about in sociology. It's how we interact with our social environment and how that affects our individual decision making. Now, when I say this is a big criticism of what we do in an intro to sociology class. People say that we paint humans and individuals as these pin cushions, right? And that society is just pushing these pins into us and we're just passive actors that are just getting these social facts and social situations just poked into us and we just sit there and we just take it. We're just getting poked constantly. That's not how I want us to imagine individuals, right? We are not just passive actors going blindly through society the way society tells us to, right? We're not simply pin cushions being poked by these circumstances beyond our control. We have the ability to navigate the social structures and the social situations that we encounter. And that ability as individuals to navigate these social situations is what we call agency. Now, this is sort of next level. All right? This is the very first day, like within the first few minutes of the class. But structure and agency is this big raging debate, sort of a debate in the social sciences. The question this thing poses, structure, agency, or both? The answer is both, right? There are social structures that confine and constrain our decision-making processes, right? There are certain rules that we have to all play by, but we also have free will. And everybody is going to navigate these different social situations differently depending on the amount of agency they have and the amount of agency they are afforded from the situation. Now, again, this is just kind of in an intro to sociology class, we're mostly going to be talking about these things, the social structures, these pre-existing social arrangements that shape our behavior, that tell us how to behave, when to behave, and all of these rules that exist. So we're really focused on the structure side in an intro class, So I want to say this, we do have this thing called agency. And even though in an intro class, we're not going to talk about agency a whole lot, we're going to focus more on the social structure side. I want to put this as a big caveat right at the beginning. We're going to talk about social structures and how they affect and how they influence individual decision making, but we do have agency, right? So just keep that in mind as we go through. The next topic that I want us to highlight from the reading is the sociological imagination. The sociological imagination, as they define it, is this ability to see a connection between personal troubles and public issues. And this is what we're talking about with even something as benign as getting ready in the morning, right? There are public issues at stake if you're going to a job and how you dress for your job. Those aren't necessarily troubles, right? But these are individual decisions that are shaped by public issues. But when we look at your textbook definition of the sociological imagination, we're generally going to be talking about things that we do consider to be personal troubles, problems, or issues, right? So unemployment is definitely an example of a personal trouble, right? If you're unemployed, you don't have an income, it's tough. It is definitely a troublesome situation to be in, but that personal trouble that you are in, if you're unemployed, is often connected to a larger pattern affected by the economy and decisions beyond the control of the individual. So there are things that are happening outside of the control of the individual that are affecting individual decisions. And that's what we're talking about with the sociological imagination. It's the ability to see that connection between the individual decision maker and society at large. The sociological imagination was pioneered. This is an idea pioneered by C. Wright Mills. And, as a sociology student in grad school, you develop affections or affinities for certain theorists. C. Wright Mills is one of my favorite guys, so we'll probably see a little bit more from him figure. But that's because the sociological imagination is so important to the study of sociology in general, and especially to an introductory class, because a lot of you are probably, I'd say most of you, probably all of you, are not going to go on to study sociology and become sociologists, right? I don't even necessarily recommend that any of you go into sociology professionally in this way, but getting a little perspective, having that sociological imagination and being able to connect a small situation to a larger social pattern is very helpful. It helps you be a more responsible citizen and helps you engage in the world around you in a more healthy and respectful and empathetic way. So before we move on to a demonstration of the sociological imagination, I want to talk about this idea of levels of analysis. This is where we talk about, in the reading, they were talking about macro sociologists and micro sociologists. So the macro, right, that's the big picture. There's a large level social structures like the economy, the political system. These are huge things that affect entire populations. Again, it can be the population of a city, population of a state, the population of a country, the whole population of the world, right? There are social structures and social patterns that affect all of these things and that control the flow of human interaction in many different lives. That's macro. That's the big picture view. Micro, those are focused on individual level interactions, right? How people interpret their actions and their activities. Individual emotion, that is the realm of the microsociologist, how people feel in a given situation. And this is where you get into social psychology. Now, the social psychologist, the psychology side of that is where they're really looking at what's going on inside the brain in a given situation. The social part, the sociologist side of the social psychologist line, they're looking at what's being input into the brain, right? And everything, the social situation that's happening that is affecting the brain chemistry. But once you get into brain chemistry, that's out of our field. The psychologists are going to talk about what's actually happening to the chemistry in the brain. But the social situation can definitely affect that. But again, as a sociologist, I'm more concerned about what's happening that is affecting the brain chemicals And then once you get into the actual what's happening with the brain chemicals go out, you're going to have to ask Mr. Alford. Sociological imagination connects the macro to the micro, right? You're looking at individual interactions and individual emotions and feelings and how those are affected by larger level, macro level social patterns. So to demonstrate this, I want to just look at a map. So this is Greenville. We can zoom out just a little bit. And this is sort of a macro level view of Greenville, right? You can sort of see from this vantage point, you can see how the city's put together, where the traffic is coming from outside the city, and how traffic might be moving within the city, right? And if you've ever driven in Greenville, you know traffic's an issue, and you could definitely consider being stuck in traffic a personal trouble. But that personal trouble of being stuck in traffic is connected to larger level social patterns. So from here, from this vantage point, the macro level is important because you can see how the city's kind of put together. You can zoom in just a little bit to take a little closer look from a macro perspective still, and you can see the neighborhoods, right? You can see these are the residential neighborhoods, and then you can see more work type neighborhoods, right? Business areas, residential, business. And so you know the traffic is going to be moving, especially around rush hour, right? Traffic is going to be moving from the residential areas to the business areas, to the workplaces. And we know that like Vita Medical Center, the hospital, it's a major employer, right? A lot of people work there, so you can assume there's a lot of traffic going on, right? So this is just the macro level often is a very cold, just heartless, dispassionate look at how things are, just based full in reality. This is what it is. This is what's causing this traffic. The micro level is when we get down right to the street view. Like, let's look right here, right at this intersection between the workplaces and the residences. Let's move it over here a little bit. And there we've seen all this traffic. So this is the micro level view. So the macro level view lets us see what's causing all the traffic patterns and what's causing traffic to build up in this area when it's building up in this area. So we're seeing the causes of these larger level patterns, but the micro level is what it gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what it's like to be in the middle of this, right? What it's like to be in the midst of traffic. And that's a very micro level interaction. What's happening to you? What's it look like to be stuck in traffic, right? Both perspectives are really important. Without the macro level, we don't really know what's causing these individual unique these situations that are affecting individuals, right? But without the micro perspective, then we really don't know how these larger level patterns are affecting an individual and how are they affecting different individuals in different ways. So those are levels of analysis. The macro level of analysis is looking at the big picture. The micro level looking at the really small, the individual situation, asking the question, what does it feel like to be an individual running around within these larger level patterns? And that is lesson number 1. So we will do more of this. I've got one more video for this week and one more reading for you for this week. But let me know if you got any questions. I'm always available by email, and you can always stop by my office over here in Building 1 anytime. Come on by.